Welcome to the June 2025 edition of What I Read This Month. Now, I should say right up front that I am recording this on Friday, June 27th, so I'm recording it before the month is over, and that's because I have a pretty busy weekend lined up, and I'm not sure I could otherwise get this done before July. It is possible, though at this point unlikely, that I will get another one or two books read before July 1st. But they will simply have to go on to the July video. I realize that in doing this, I could make myself a target of mockery by children, and that mobs could gather in the street and chase me with pitchforks and torches, but it simply can't be helped. So here is what I read in June of 2025. Dilvish the Damned. Now, I'm always got one or two anthologies of short stories going. I like to read a short story or two in between novels. As I think I said in my last video, it sort of cleanses the literary palate, if I may say it in an obnoxiously elitist way. And so this was one that I had going that I happened to finish at the beginning of June. Dilvish the Damned by Roger Zelazny. Now, this is a collection of interconnected short stories set in a fantasy world. The protagonist, Dilvish, is a hero who was unjustly banished to hell for 200 years when he tried to stop an evil wizard from performing a human sacrifice. Now Dilvish is back. He's escaped from hell, and he's accompanied by a metal sentient horse named Black, whose tongue is sharp but whose loyalty to Dilvish seems unwavering. Dilvish's goal in life is to find the wizard who sent him to hell and exact revenge. But Dilvish also has chronic hero syndrome. If someone is in trouble, he'll help them. This makes his journey perpetually exciting. The stories mix adventure with clever, inventive plots. Dilvish encounters a demon, a vampire, several minor gods, a village where the buildings move to form a lethal maze, and other bizarre dangers. He and Black must fight, use what magic they can wield, and or just plain outsmart a variety of adversaries. Now, Zelazny's dry wit is often on display, and his characters, both good guys and bad guys, are very well crafted. This anthology leads into the novel The Changing Land, where Dilvish's quest comes to an end, and it does leave me anxious to read that one. Next, I read Hidden in Smoke by Lee Goldberg. This is the third in the Sharp and Walker books about two arson investigators who work for the LA County Sheriff's Department. These have all been excellent books, and but it's a purely subjective opinion when I say that this one was the best of the three. Sharp and Walker look into a series of arsons pulled off in one night, but just when they have a likely suspect identified, they're pulled off that case to investigate a huge fire that took out a section of a major freeway and plunges Los Angeles into traffic jam hell. When the case eventually involves a murder, they team up for the second time with Eve Ronin, the homicide detective who stars in another series written by Goldberg. Now, parallel to this story is the continuing adventures of Danny Cole. This is a thief/con man who encountered Sharp and Walker in the first novel. Danny's Robin Hood syndrome is activated after Walker tracks him down and asks him to take down an arrogant, greedy rich man named Roland Slezak. Slezak is responsible for the death of a friend of Danny, and he's jacked up the price of a medication that Walker's toddler son needs. And I just wonder if Slezak's last name is taken from the Golden Age actor Walter Slezak, who often played sleazy characters in film noirs. Anyway, Danny's plan involves the dangerous heist of the world's most expensive wristwatch, setting off a series of plot twists that convince Slezak to cut the price of the drug and then get him tossed into the slammer. The two stories seem largely separate, but the climax brings everything more or less together as Sharp and Walker race to arrest an arsonist, and then race once again, along with Eve Ronin, to catch Slezak. Goldberg's strong characterizations and his wonderful ability to bring about unexpected plot twists are all on display here. I really do think this is the best of the series so far. Next, I read Death to the Daleks. I am currently reading, in order, the Target novelizations of the classic TV series, starting with John Pertwee's last season as the Doctor, which was the first season that featured Sarah Jane Smith as his companion. She is tied for first place as my favorite companion. So this one is based on a third Doctor Sarah Jane story, and it has the TARDIS landing on a desolate planet, then immediately losing power. The same thing happens to both an Earth ship and a Dalek ship. The native population consists of a primitive tribe that worships a huge sentient city, and the city is the source of the power drain. So can the Doctor, the humans, and the Daleks work together to get off the planet? Not really, since Daleks obsess a little too much about exterminating all other life forms. In the end, it's up to the Doctor to solve a series of puzzles to get into the city and give it a sort of nervous breakdown. It's an okay story. Terrance Dicks does his usual great job of turning the TV story into a prose tale. But the Daleks are a little wasted. They feel like an unnecessary addendum to a story that works fine without them. The Doctor's greatest enemy should have a more prominent part in any story in which they appear. Next we have Swords Against Wizardry, another anthology I was reading that I happened to finish this month. It's written by Fritz Lieber, and is the 4th volume of his Fafford and Grey Mouser stories, some of the finest sword and sorcery stuff ever written. And there's 2 pretty good short stories in this volume, but the meat of it is 2 superb novellas. The first of the novellas is Stardock, which has Fafford and the Mouser racing competitors up a mountain, determined to find an invisible treasure guarded by invisible threats. Along the way, they meet a pair of invisible girls, who might prove to be valuable allies. The other novella is The Lords of Carmel, or Quarmel, I think is the best way to say it. This has the 2 heroes taking jobs in an underground kingdom that's suffused with magic and menace and treachery. The 2 take jobs with opposite factions, the 2 princes vying to be the next king, without realizing that the other is also in Quarmel. It's a wonderful story, with the dark atmosphere of the tale sprinkled with humor, and plot twists coming fast and furious as the story builds up to a violent and satisfying conclusion. After that, I read an ace double. This is just, the ace doubles were wonderful. There was a science fiction series, there was a mystery series, and there was a Western series. And each one was 2 short novels. You would read one, flip it upside down, and then there would be the other novel. And this was a good one. The first of the novels, The Age of Ruin, is a very imaginative and action-packed post-apocalyptic novel about a warrior named Jehalazar, who comes from a primitive tribe of mutants. He, for instance, has purple hair and eyes, while his chief has a third eye. Jehalazar is not born into the tribe, though, but he was found as a baby in the wreckage of a flying machine. So he sets off across the world to discover his origin and to eventually discover what caused the downfall of human civilization. Along the way, he battles both monsters and the elements. He meets a number of strange societies with various levels of technologies, leading to a variety of mini-adventures. He makes friends with a sentient rock, and discovers a possibly intelligent species of goo called the Dis, which can disintegrate or assimilate living matter. In that, the Dis is perhaps the greatest threat to sentient life on the planet. The novel speeds along from one crisis to another, and it's really great fun. Now, Code Duello involves a team of agents from the United Planets visiting a planet that's dealing with a possible insurgency. The team includes a scientist from a high-gravity planet, and who thus has super strength, a 26-year-old woman who looks like an 8-year-old child, a bullwhip expert, and a man who is apparently the luckiest person in the galaxy. The ensuing story has action and suspense, but also humor, as well as cynical political satire and commentary. The pacing's a little slow at times, but the ending is wonderful. Perhaps the funniest book I've ever read, 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. Three Men in a Boat, Not to Mention the Dog, is the full title. And it just describes a 2-week boat trip along the Thames. There's the narrator, there's his 2 friends, and there's a dog named Montmorency. None of the men are particularly competent, though each of them is convinced he knows more than his friends. Written in 1889, the author started out intending to write a serious travel guide, but his sense of humor took over, and we end up with an account of slapstick misadventures, such as all 3 men suffering injuries of some sort while trying to open a tin of pineapples after discovering they forgot to pack a can opener. And the author often digresses into anecdotes about a zillion other subjects. An account of his uncle Bodger disastrously attempting to hang a picture on a wall, or a tale of enduring living nearby someone trying to learn to play the bagpipes. There's another fan of this novel who described the section about smelly cheese as comedy gold. This is truly a hilarious novel. There's a few serious passages, but mostly it's just one incredibly funny tale after another. I cannot recommend this book more highly. I finished reading the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes this month, or rereading it for the zillionth time. I am listening to a podcast where they're analyzing the original stories, so I am reading whatever stories they're about to discuss in the next episode I haven't listened to yet. I'm reading those stories before listening to that episode. And I finished up Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes this month. And like the previous volume, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, this is Arthur Conan Doyle at the top of his game. This volume includes one of the best tales ever, Silver Blaze, as well as the ironic, touching, and amusing The Adventure of the Yellow Face. It ends with the final problem, in which Doyle supposedly kills off Holmes, and at the same time creates one of the most memorable arch-villains in literature. I know Doyle was legitimately tired of writing Holmes stories, and was only lured back into it when the Strand magazine threw a huge amount of money at him. But I've always found it interesting that Holmes's supposed death was one in which no body was found afterwards, leaving the possibility of bringing the great detective back at some future date. It seems likely that Doyle was keeping that possibility in the back of his mind even as he wrote the final problem. Sherlock Holmes is, after all, the man who never lived but will never die. Doyle had created one of the most enduring literary characters ever brought to vivid life on the printed page. His eventual return was probably inevitable. Then we get to a shadow novel by Maxwell Grant, real name Walter Gibson, The Kings of Crime. And The Shadow is the best pulp hero ever written. I am reading shadow novels at least once a month because there is currently a virtual book club discussing these novels. This is the one we're going to be talking about tomorrow night as of when I'm recording this. And this one takes the Shadow out of the Big Apple to Seaview City, an obvious XB of Atlantic City. 4 kings of crime are planning to bring crime to the resort town: gambling, drugs, blackmail, and kidnapping. It's a great shadow novel in several ways. First, there's several superb action scenes, most notably a gunfight between the Shadow and a gang of thugs in a pitch-dark hotel room. At the climax, the Shadow makes judicious use of a sniper rifle and a rifle grenade to ensure the bad guys come to an explosive end. The other strong feature of the novel is some nuanced characterizations, particularly the redemption arc of one of those kings of crime. Throughout his career, the Shadow went up against some pretty ruthless and bloodthirsty villains, and most of them were 6 feet under by the time any one of the Shadow novels ends. But in this case, one of the kings of crime swerves away from this. His part in the crime empire is foiled by the Shadow early on, and the guy is sent to prison. But now he worries about his family, who didn't know he was a crook and are now destitute. His fellow crooks were supposed to look after that family, but they've pretty much thrown the family to the wolves. So this crook breaks out with a vague plan of taking vengeance on the other kings of crime. But circumstances lead him to continue to examine his life. In a realistic, step-by-step transformation, he ends up being allied with the Shadow, helping to destroy crime, and perfectly willing to return to jail and pay for his crimes afterwards. There's a lot of honestly earned emotion in his character arc. In a world where bad guys were much more likely to take a .45 from one of the Shadow's blazing automatics, it's nice to see someone change his ways. And he's not the only cool supporting character. Seaview's City's police chief, is a great guy. In the end, he does need the Shadow to figure out who the bad guys actually are. But he's honest and courageous, and he brings the police force to the front lines when necessary. I like him. And finally, there's a good mystery at the heart of the story. There's an ace who's the brains behind the four kings of crime. His true identity is a secret through most of the story. An astute reader will guess he's a member of the town council, but which one? The book's third-person narrator refers to the police chief as having an honest heart, so it's not him, but that leaves a quartet of other suspects. The answer to this might catch a few readers by surprise. Though readers familiar with Walter Gibson's plot twists have a fair chance of guessing correctly. So, we have a strong story, a nice change of location from the usual streets of New York City, a few fantastic action scenes, and some strong secondary characters. Kings of Crime, I shall say it correctly eventually, and it is yet another wonderful Shadow adventure. Next, I have Go for Broke, the 12th in a series of World War II novels about a recon platoon fighting in the Pacific. By this point in the series, they are in New Guinea. And every time I think the novels in the series can't possibly get more intense, the author, Len Levinson, manages to make them more intense anyway. As I said, this one's set in New Guinea, and it picks up right where the last one left off, with the Americans having just fought off a Japanese attack. But another attack follows. The Americans are pushed back, and the recon platoon, or rather the few survivors of the recon platoon, find itself cut off behind enemy lines. They gather up what weapons, ammo, and food they can find, and they hunker down to wait. But when some Japanese soldiers tumble to their position, they steal a truck and make a run for their own lines. The escape is anything but smooth. An attempt to cross a Japanese-held bridge brings on another burst of violent action. The truck is lost, and the soldiers take to the river. Later on, they ambush a Japanese patrol boat, and eventually they take cover in a cave. There's 4 army nurses already in the cave, after they had also been cut off during the initial attack. This leads what appears to be a desperate last stand after the Japanese find them and once again attack. All of this is mixed in with scenes involving the American leadership planning a counterattack and a few scenes from the Japanese perspective. That includes a really neat interlude involving 3 Japanese privates who were also lost in the jungle, ineffectively trying to find their way back to their own lines. This parallel narrative humanizes the story without slowing down the momentum. The action is relentless, with some great character moments seeded throughout the story. As usual, we don't know if all of the long-term characters who have been in this series from the beginning are going to survive. Not every character does. There's no plot armor protecting any one character in this. This may be my favorite in the series so far. The Sowers of the Thunder by Robert E. Howard, another anthology I just happened to finish this month. Once again, I'm reading like a short story or two from any one of several anthologies between novels, and gradually finish off these anthologies. Now, the 4 stories reprinted in this paperback have long since been reprinted again in one of Del Rey's excellent Robert E. Howard volumes, along with REH's other historical adventures. But I have a fondness for this particular selection of stories. First, they are arguably the best of Howard's historical adventures. Second, I bought this at the Stars and Stripes bookstore in Subic Bay, the Philippines, when I was in the Navy, and I read it at a time when I was familiar only with Howard's Conan and Solomon Kane stories. So these were my introduction into his non-fantasy adventures. I was engrossed in them from the instant I first read them decades ago, and I still revisit these particular tales on a regular basis. 3 of the stories are set during the Crusades. and a fourth during the 1529 siege of Vienna by the Ottoman Empire. They're full of violent action, unforgettable characters, and vivid imagery. Howard draws you into the time and place of these adventures and puts you in the midst of the bloody clash of armored knights and desert warriors, all battling in the searing desert heat. Several of the stories have grim endings, but they are tales about grim men driven by the need to fight and or exact revenge on their enemies. One of these stories, Shadow of the Vulture, introduces us to Red Sonja, a Cossack swordwoman who is one of my favorite REH characters. She's different from the Red Sonja adaptation that Marvel Comics used to put her back in the Hyborian Age and team her up with Conan. And I like that Hyborian Age Sonja, but I'd love to have seen more stories with the 16th century Sonja and her companion Gottfried von Kalmbach. Their continued partnership would have been one of the greatest series in pulp fiction. And, what could have been? Arrowsmith. So smart in their fine uniforms. This is a graphic novel, a superbly illustrated graphic novel, that collected a 6-issue miniseries set in an alternate history version of World War I. What makes this world different is the existence of magic and magical creatures, giving us an industrialized world built on magic devices rather than mundane technology. The main character is Fletcher Arrowsmith, an idealistic 16-year-old living in this world's version of America. He runs away and joins the Air Corps to fight for the Allies. In this world, the pilots in the Air Corps do not fly airplanes. Rather, they team up with small dragons, using spells to borrow the ability to fly from those dragons. Then they go into combat armed with swords and with crossbows that fire magical firebolts. What follows is a coming of age and an end of innocence story. Fletcher and his comrades are thrown into combat with inadequate training, and most of them don't live long. Fletcher survives long enough to become a veteran, but by then he's seen enough to know that there's no clear-cut good guys and bad guys in this war. The art by Carlos Pacheco really is superb, bringing this bizarre and violent world to life. Kurt Busiek's script is intelligent, and it's full of three-dimensional characters. Fletcher's character arc is very much parallel to what characters in countless war stories have gone through. Think of the movie Dawn Patrol, for instance. But that arc is done extremely well here. Then we have The Vampire Affair. And this is the 6th in a series of Man from U.N.C.L.E. paperbacks that were published in the 60s while the show was originally on the air. And this is a really fun entry in the U.N.C.L.E. series of paperbacks. An U.N.C.L.E. agent is murdered in Romania and with his body drained of blood. Napoleon and Ilya are sent to investigate. They know, of course, that the evidence they keep finding that indicates a vampire is responsible for the death must be nonsense. Of course there's a logical, rational explanation. No matter how strongly events keep pointing to a supernatural killer, there has to be a rational answer to it all. I mean, doesn't there? In addition to this great premise, the novel captures the humor of the TV series and gives us several great supporting characters. This includes an ally named Zoltan, a descendant of Dracula who's always being mistaken for a vampire by villagers. He proves to be an actual valuable ally for them. And there's a wonderful cameo by real-life person Forrest Ackerman, the founder of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. In fact, I'm kind of sad that Forrest was only in one chapter. It would have been kind of neat if he joined up the team for the duration of this adventure. Now, I'm reading the U.N.C.L.E. novels in order, and this one might be the most purely entertaining entry so far. Next, we have Lord Edgware Dies, a Hercule Poirot novel by Agatha Christie. Angela and I are reading the Christie novels in original publication order, and then we are listening to a podcast we discovered where they're discussing the novels. So we read the novel that's going to be discussed in the next episode we haven't listened to yet, then we listen to it together. In this one, 2 and eventually 3 murders, some disguises, a letter with a missing page, a disappearing butler, a seemingly inept attempt of framing someone, and an incredibly narcissistic widow all make for a difficult case for poor Hercule Poirot. It's a good mystery, with a typically fun reveal of the real killer at the climax. I wonder, though, why regular supporting characters Captain Hastings and Inspector Japp always initially think that Hercule Poirot has lost his marbles. Then it always turns out that he knew exactly what he was doing all along, and he's the one that figures out who the killer is. The guy is right every time. For heaven's sakes, Hastings and Japp, learn your lesson. And finally, I read The Last Dogfight. I am making an effort to reread some of my favorite World War II themed novels. A few months ago, I read The Beardless Warrior by Richard Matheson. Now I'm finally remembering to read another World War II novel, and I picked another great one, The Last Dogfight by Martin Caidin. It's set, of course, during World War II. It takes place in an out-of-the-way island chain in the Pacific. A Japanese air squadron occupies an island at one end of the chain. An American air squadron, flying outdated P-40 Warhawk fighters, is located at the other end of the chain. The two enemy forces pick away at each other every chance they get. The book is written by Martin Caidin. He's perhaps best known for his science fiction novels, most notably Cyborg, which was the basis of the TV series The $6 Million Man. But Caidin was also an accomplished military historian and a pilot, so he knew what he was doing when he was writing about aerial combat. Consequently, he's able to fill The Lost Dogfight with one extraordinary and realistic battle scene after another. The Japanese Zeros can outperform the P-40s, and one particular pilot, Shigeru Tanimoto, has over a dozen kills. But one American pilot, Mitch Ross, is doing just as well, his own skill more than making up for his inferior aircraft. Later, the Americans get the more advanced P-38 Lightnings, giving them the advantage. Tanimoto, though, still seems invincible. Late in the novel, after the bomb drops on Hiroshima, Tanimoto and Ross arrange a one-on-one duel to find out who is really the best. And the battle scenes here really are great, both large-scale affairs and one-on-one dogfights. Caidin takes us into a sky full of airplanes, all trying to shoot each other down, expertly describing the potentially confusing action in clear, fast-moving prose. He wraps this up in some great characterizations, both with the main characters and the supporting cast. Caidin wasn't just an expert in combat planes and military history. He was also a superb storyteller. And so that's it. That's what I read in June of this year. As usual, I do hope that we can bring the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast off of hiatus before long. But in the meantime, I will continue to do these monthly What I Read videos. It's ironic that this, as a replacement for the ERB podcast, it's the second month in a row I have not read an Edgar Rice Burroughs book. I do have a project to read them all in publication order, and I do hope to get to the next one in July. And so that is all for now. Thank you for listening.